finish that up and then we'll do some heart anatomy. So, this is the last thing you have to learn on blood, which is what happens if you start bleeding. So we're now going to do the blood clotting steps. By the way, the most worthless word on the planet is the one doctors chose for this. They say this process is hemostasis. What word sounds just like that? Exactly. So one of the problems is you look at that word and you're going to think it's something else. But hemo is blood, stasis is the same. They could have chosen anything better than that. Right? So I'm happy it's just saying blood clotting. That's cool with me. So on this overhead, we have some steps thou shalt know of how to stop your blood from bleeding. So up the top, I've damaged you. I've stabbed you in the side of a bar. There you are. What's the first thing that's going to happen? What does that say?
Blood vessel.
Blood vessel spasm. So step number 1 is the blood vessel spasm. Saladin wants to do $20 and say vasospasm. That's okay. Vaso means blood vessel. What's it doing when it's spasming? Being bigger or smaller? Smaller. So the whole goal here is you want your blood vessels to get smaller. Why? Less blood loss, right? You're trying to turn off the valving, right? Turn off the loss. So it makes some sense. If you get cut, I want my blood vessels to get smaller to avoid bleeding more. So that happens usually all the time. The second step after you spasm in your blood is that thing, platelet plug. It sounds just like it sounds. So running what platelets are for? Blood clotting. But they have a peculiar role. So I'm going to show you a picture. This is not necessarily anatomically correct, although it works. Okay, here I just stabbed you in the bar. Right? I've cut open your vessels. You're bleeding like a stuck pig. And now it doesn't show the spasm, but it does show the blood's leaking out of you. These little white things, which are not anatomically correct, represent the platelets. What are they doing here? They're plugging it up, just like it sounds. So they begin to stick to the blood vessel. They stick to each other. So if you read this little below, adhere to each other, adhere, we stick. And eventually, you have that. What is that? Plug. That's a plug. You can also call it a cork. A scab is exactly what you call it at home. So your mom told you, never ever do what? Pick your scab. And when you do that, ignoring mom, what happens?
You bleed.
Because you just pulled the cork out of the bottle. Right? If I rip this off, I'm pulling the platelets off of the blood vessel, letting the wine out of the bottle. So the second step for most tissue damage is you're going to try plugging it with the platelets. So these adhere, fancy word, they adhere to collagen. Remind me from a while ago what collagen, where is that found?
Connective tissues.
In connective tissues. Name something that has connective tissue. Skin, blood vessels. Right? So it's going to leak out and begin to contact collagen and begin to get sticky. And thereby I'm going to start sticking to the broken holes, broken parts. So if you get cut, you're going to get small blood vessels, cork it. But then let's say you keep bleeding. That won't work. So we've got to do something else. So our third and final step is we're going to clot the blood. Even though we call all this blood clotting, final actual step is to make a clot. Right? So what does it mean to clot your blood? What are you doing to it? Stopping it how?
To make it become solid?
Very good. You're making Jell-O out of blood. Not literally Jell-O. But describe it. Last time you made Jell-O, you put the water in the pan, right? It's runny, and then magically what happens to Jell-O? It becomes solid and doesn't run anymore.
No.
No, right? My Jell-O makes run. Okay. The idea is if I turn it into a solid, it can't leak out as much anymore. And so what you're going to do when you clot your blood, essentially you want to turn your blood into a Jell-O mixture. You want to make it less and less solid, less and less liquid, more and more solid.
How long does that take?
Hopefully about a minute or less for most people. Right? It can take longer, but you want soon. Right? So now here comes the pain. There is a hideously long, ugly set of pathways on the right-hand side of this picture. PCC says, thou shalt know the clotting factors in order, they say. Thou shalt. I want to keep my job, so thou shalt. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the two pathways, the clotting factors that thou shalt memorize in order, and explain what you're going to learn. So this is one of these plug-and-chug flashcard kind of days, where you're just going to crank out Roman numerals up your wazoo. Right? Let's do that. So this is called the clotting cascade, because it just falls all over the place. There's two pathways, and you can see them up there. We have intrinsic pathway, and then we have extrinsic pathway. Both of these are for clotting your blood. Okay, what's the difference? It's on the screen. What's the difference between vessel versus tissue? So a good way to say it is the intrinsic. Read this, I'm damaging my blood vessels. In extrinsic, I damage the cells. And you can say, well, there's cells in my blood vessel. Yes, there are. Right? But the concept is that the cells can do this outside of your blood vessels. That's where they got the name. This one, you basically have to be inside a blood vessel to do it. But I don't care how you define it. Just recognize that this one tends to be inside the blood vessels. This one tends to be, you can do this outside the vessels. So if I punch you really hard, and you're bruising inside your body, that's probably some combination of this one, inside the vessels, and this one outside the vessels. If I stab you in the bar and your blood ends up on my shoe and gets solid, that's going to be this one. The scab inside your broken rib is this one, right? So normally you'll do both of these. You'll clot inside the tubes as well as where you're bleeding. Right? But they both work slightly differently. So let's go down the intrinsic pathway first. Let's see what we do. So, intrinsic pathway. We got our platelets, right? We already did that in step 2. Then we're going to turn on Roman numerals. So unfortunately, there is no shortcut. You have to do the Roman numerals. Good God. Okay. So, what's that Roman numeral there? 12. That's number 12. Okay, what's the difference between 12 and 12a?
There's an A.
Yes, an E. Thank you. I got that. What does the A represent?
Different alternate way, one of two ways.
Yes. So instead of the word alternate, there's another A word you could pick.
Alternative.
Alternative, yeah, additional, or activated.
How about activated?
So what this is trying to say in a bizarre way, you take a inactive number 12, and you magically turn it on to become an active number 12. I don't care if you write a 12 or 12a. I just want, you're supposed to know the order of the numbers, not if it's an A or not. So we're just going to do the numbers. So we are going to start with factor 12. So these are called your clotting factors. So you can call this factor 12 or clotting factor 12, or on a test you just put the Roman numeral. I'm cool with that. You're going to start with a 12. 12 will do something magical and turn on whom? Who's it turning on?
11.
Number 11. Hey, this is almost okay. 12 goes to factor 11, right? So remember your 112, this is representing an enzyme, right? I'm on the arrow. So 11 becomes 9. Okay, it was almost good for a minute. Right, just in case you don't know the Roman numerals, right? This is 12, this is 11, this is 9. But remember, you have to write the Roman numerals officially. So then 9, I'm going to add stuff to 9. What am I going to add to 9? A 7 and a calcium. So then we're going to take and go, I'm going to add 7, which is B11. That's 7. I'm going to add some calcium. And then what did I make after I take a 9 and add a 7 to it? What do I have? Let's find out. I turned on my 9, and then I add one more thing to it. What am I adding to my 9? What's this? I have to add an 8.
What?
I did not come up with this. Worthless trivia, they name them in the order they discovered them. Right? So you discover 9 somehow after you discovered 7 by 2.
Oh my God.
I did not invent this, right? So we're going to add number 8. So I went to 9, I added 7 and 8 to 9, and now I'm going to end up down over here. I'm going to end up with a single number right there. What did I just make there?
10.
Number 10.
Should
I'm
that
going
be,
to draw that one.
should that be an
Oh,
8
that
or
should be an
a-
8. I wrote a 9, sorry.
So do we not need to know anything about the PF3?
No.
So the 8 and 9 combined together to make 10?
Yes, basically.
7, 8.
You're going to end up with number 10. And there's a reason I wrote the number 10 over here besides the fact I'm running out of room. If you look at the way this picture's written, there's a brace coming down from the left, and what do you see over here?
Oh, right there.
It's from both sides. So 10 can be activated from the intrinsic pathway, which you just did, or it can be turned on from the extrinsic pathway. So it's going to be in the middle of your notes. So let's go back to the intrinsic one more time, just for laughs. So I have 12 to 11 to 9. 9 plus 7 and 8 makes 10. Again, I didn't come up with this, right? But if you think through it, one way to help your notes is every number from 7 to 12. They're just out of order. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's just the wrong order. Right? I wish they would put them in order, but they didn't. Now let's go back and do the extrinsic pathway. This one's much easier. You hope this is the only one on the test. What's the first thing you're going to make? Tissue factors. What do they call it? You can call it TF. That's fine. I got it. It has other names. There's a clotting factor for it as well. We're just going to call it TF. TF magically becomes, what is it? Ooh, it turns on something. What the heck's that? It makes 7. So tissue factor becomes and activates number 7. So we go to green arrow and do a 7. B1. Hey, where else have you seen a 7 before? 7A. 7A. So you can draw a little line. See, that 7 is the same 7 as over here. So we can use the 7 from the extrinsic as part of the intrinsic. You can do that. That's okay. So I'm going to do something with 7, but I'm going to keep going. And what do I eventually make? Yes?
The crazy little arrows.
Yes,
It looks like 7 is added to the tissue factor.
it is. Yes.
So,
To make 7A. So I'm going to just say tissue factor makes 7A because that's what it does. It eventually activates it. Right. So this is inactive. Basically, tissue factor is the enzymatic catalyst for 7A.
What about calcium?
Oh, yes, we can add calcium. That's cool. So we're going to add some calcium. Can't go wrong with calcium. But what are we going to make? Oh, we're going to make some 7. We're going to use some calcium, and we're going to make one letter at the bottom. What are we making?
10.
Number 10. That's the easy path.
You see making, what,
Or activating would be the better
but
way.
what is it?
What's
Besides
10?
10, what is 10? What does
10 is an
rep-
enzyme. So you're turning on, basically you're turning on that enzyme. And that enzyme's going to turn on other stuff. So we haven't clotted anything yet. We're just getting there.
It's a cascade.
Yes, it is. So, back to my intrinsic. So intrinsic, I do all these numbers to turn on number 10. Or I can do the extrinsic pathway, turn on some letters and one number, and still get to 10. So 10 has its own little name. It's in both pathways. And it's active. So we call this one the common factor. Why is it common? Because both sides make 10 eventually. No matter who you are, you will make a 10, either intrinsically or extrinsically. Even though 7 is used in both, 10 is where the common pathway is. But we're not done. Because after number 10, there's more. Of course. So 10, I'm going to write over here because I'm running out of room. Did I tell you to leave lots of space? I didn't do that. So we're going to start back at 10. From over there. 10 is going to go down. I'm going to add stuff to 10. What factors am I adding to 10? To B. That's 5. So I'm going to add 5 in there. Just 5. I'm going to add some calcium because you can't go wrong adding calcium. I'm going to ignore the PF for right now. We're going to end up in a big box. What did we make in the big box? Prothrombin activator. So once I've made 10, I'm then going to basically use 5 and calcium to make prothrombin activator. There is no 6, surprisingly. There is a 6, it's just not in here. Right. So what does prothrombin activator do? Take a guess.
Activate prothrombin.
That's exactly right. So now we're going to turn on prothrombin. So prothrombin activator activates prothrombin, which is sometimes called factor 2. You're going to say prothrombin. What does prothrombin become?
Thrombin.
Thrombin. So that's going to become thrombin. So prothrombin activator to prothrombin to thrombin. And we're almost there, because then thrombin is going to cause me to make more crud. I'm going to add, I know, I didn't invent this. I'm going to take my thrombin and add it to number 13, lucky 13, to make fibrin. So thrombin plus 13, which we're going to call 13, is going to make fibrin. You're going to circle and box and star that one. What does fibrin sound like? Fibers. So what you're doing is you're turning on fibrin to make fibers in the blood. So this makes blood clot. You turn the blood into a solid when you get to fibrin. So all this math is to get you to make clots in your blood through fibrin. Right? So you get to 10, one way or the other. Once you have 10, you're going to add 5 and 13 into this pathway to end up in fibrin. And each one turns on the next one. Makes sense? Okay.
So where's the inactive and active?
For which one?
So does everyone have an active and
Yes.
inactive?
So
Okay.
basically, every one of those letters would have an A
Okay.
after it's turned on. Yes.
Can you scroll down a little bit?
This way?
Yes. What you drew on the board is
Yes.
different than
A
what's
little
on
bit,
there.
yes. Because 13 actually would join with fibrin. I have it kind of going plus the thrombin. But that's okay because thrombin activates 13. So I just made it a little simpler.
So thrombin 13, 13 to fibrin.
Yes. So you can put them as one step if you want. So, just to show you I'm not making this up much. Yeah, just hand
Damage
these
to
numbers.
small blood vessels and capillaries frequently occurs. When these vessels are damaged, there are 3 basic mechanisms that promote hemostasis, or the stoppage of bleeding.
All right, let's see.
Following damage, there is an immediate reflex that promotes vasoconstriction, thus diminishing blood loss.
Or vasospasm, or blood vessels get smaller. Pick any way you want to say that in the world. I'm making my blood vessels get less big. Is that English? All right.
Exposed collagen from the damaged site will promote the platelets to adhere.
So we're going scab, the plug, the cork. I'm trying to stop the blood from leaking out. If you think about it, in the kitchen, you can't make Jell-O set unless it's sitting there, right? Anyone ever try to do that? Keep stirring your Jell-O? It doesn't set. So for this to work, I have to stop the blood from leaking out with the plug. That gives the blood enough time to actually set the Jell-O. Right? So if you're an EMTs or first aid, what are you supposed to do on a big cut? You're supposed to push what? And what's that supposed to do?
Stop it.
Do that, right? You're trying to stop the blood from coming out the hole, give the platelets time to stick, and give the blood time to clot. If you're spurting blood out, you can't make Jell-O if it's spurting. Right? So all those things you learn in first aid are vaguely like this. You got to get the blood slow enough to kick on all these factors. So let's keep going. So we did our platelet plug.
When platelets adhere to the damaged vessel, they undergo degranulation and release cytoplasmic granules, which contain serotonin, a vasoconstrictor, and ADP and thromboxane A2.
I'm never going to ask you those words. Okay. But that's some chemicals that help your body try to keep the blood in. Now we're going to do the fun one.
The ADP attracts more platelets to the area, and the thromboxane A2 promotes platelet aggregation, degranulation, and vasoconstriction. Thus, ADP and thromboxane A2 promote more platelet adhesion, and therefore more ADP and thromboxane. The positive feedback promotes the formation of a platelet plug.
Okay, so why is that positive feedback?
When more
Keeps adding, right? What would happen if blood clotting were negative feedback? You wouldn't happen, right? You form a blood and get rid of the blood, right? Even that wouldn't be very good. So this one is examples where you're going to try making it get worse. You're trying to add more platelets. So once they stick, once I clot, I keep clotting, I keep sticking. Otherwise your blood would just not do that, right? So it's one of these few times you can say positive feedback on the test, not have me screech and scream. Right? So you're trying to increase the change, trying to increase the platelet or the clotting. Right? And now we get the math part. Here
The
we go.
final hemostatic mechanism is coagulation.
They're going to use
Damaged tissue
fewer
releases
numbers.
factor 3, which, with the aid of calcium ions, will activate factor 7, thus initiating the extrinsic mechanism. Factor 12 from active platelets will activate factor 11, thus initiating the intrinsic mechanism.
Okay, so they're leaving off some of the numbers PCC asked about. Let's do the intrinsic one first. They said factor who does factor what? Let's see. Factor 12, hey, that's up here. Factor 11, yeah. They're going to leave out all these other numbers, but they're talking about these two here, 12 to 11. Now, over on this other one, I see factor 7, got that. What the heck's factor 3? Yeah, there's other synonyms for all these words. In fact, all these have names. So you can say factor 3, the Hagman factor, Christmas, they all have different ways of doing it. So on a test, I'm not going to scream if you say factor 3. I'm not going to scream if you say TF. Believe it or not, I do know the synonyms. Right? So you can pick the numbers or some of the names. If you go back to the picture I had here, notice that prothrombin's number 2, right? This one's number 1. There's just different ways you can name them. So I'm okay if you give me the name or the number. I'm not going to have too much of a conniption fit. I'll have a little fit, but not much. Right, let's keep going.
Both active factor 7 and active factor 11 will promote cascade reactions, eventually activating factor 10.
There's our common factor. Everybody goes to 10 at some level. So 10 then is going to turn on the common pathway. Let's try that.
Active factor 10, along with factor 3, factor 5, calcium ions, and platelet thromboplastic factor, PF3, will activate prothrombin activator.
Okay, so, that's this, right? I'm taking calcium, there's a 5 in there, there's a 3, which comes around another way, and we're going to basically turn on prothrombin. So what happens after prothrombin?
Prothrombin activator converts prothrombin to thrombin.
That's where we're at.
Thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin. Fibrin initially forms a loose mesh, but then factor 13 causes the formation of covalent crosslinks, which convert fibrin to a dense aggregation of fibers. Platelets and red blood cells become caught in this mesh of fiber, thus the formation of a blood clot.
It's like netting fish. Right? Just trying to catch everything in the Jell-O of the blood. Makes sense? So there's one of these times in this class You're just going to have to memorize a bunch of numbers in order. Like the cranial nerves. Just there's more of them. And I don't have a dirty rhyme to teach you. So if you come up with a dirty rhyme, I'll pay you $1. You know, I don't know. You just have to memorize the pathways and basically the steps of the numbers to get to here. Make sense? Thou shalt, thou shalt. My pimp says so, and that's what happens.
My pimp.
Yeah, 5 in calcium to 10, and then we'll get.
Okay? I hear lots of quiet. All right, so what we're going to do is you're going to get your packet of pain. We're going to practice these numbers. Like going to a blood clotting case study. Okay, can someone tell me from their background what we call diseases when you can't clot all the way or well? Hemophilia, right? Which is a silly word because it means you love blood, but if you're bleeding, I'm not sure you love it anymore. But hemophilia is a clotting disorder, meaning you have a problem in these cascades. Right? So this case study is basically about a hemophilic. It's someone who doesn't clot very well. Right? So if you read through here, he bruises easy, intracranial hemorrhaging after falling out of the crib, most people do that, bruising with trauma, knees are bad, grandpa died, mom, blah, blah, blah. Everyone is dying from this bleeding stuff. So here's the lab test. Let's go through each of these, future healthcare professionals, and see what you think. Are Justin's platelets okay? Let's find out.
Yeah.
Platelets are here, normal's here, is that okay? Yep. Sure. So he doesn't have a problem putting a plug in his blood. Alright? Bleeding time. 6 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's okay. I mean, I'd like a little sooner, but that's okay. So now we have these 2 tests doctors will order to figure out if there's problems in these pathways. No, you don't have to know their names. I'm not going to care. But there's 2 different tests because there are 2 different pathways, right? So they're going to test each one. It turns out that this first one is for the extrinsic pathway. No, you never have to know that for a test. The second one is for the intrinsic pathway. So the doctor is checking which path to clotting is affected. So I'm never going to test you on the PTT stuff. But let's go through it and figure out these questions. So we figured out that Justin has a problem, not bleeding, he has a good job bleeding. Hard time clotting, so he's hemophilia. Right? Tell me about the difference between the 2 pathways. What's the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic? What's the difference between them?
Inside and outside.
Yeah, one is inside the blood vessels, intrinsic. One is outside the blood vessels, extrinsic. It's just what part of your body is saying to clot. Right? And there's a more detailed definition if you want. And so let's go to the test again. PT test for extrinsic. PTT test for intrinsic. So there's a test for each one. And again, you don't have to know that detail. But there's 2 tests because there's 2 paths. Now comes the easy questions. Number 4. Both of them end up sharing a common pathway. Which factor is common?
10.
Number 10, because everybody gets to 10. No matter which path you took, you take the exit at 10. Right? So, but 10 isn't the whole pathway. So what other factors are in the common path? We have 10. Who else could you name? Growth hormone activator, thrombin. Everything on this board is a single common path. Everybody is going to here. But 10 is always called the common factor. Right? The one you get to. Okay? So if you look up, let's now look at his data. So looking at the PT test and PTT test, which of those tests is screwed up? The PTT test, which means he has problems with which pathway? The intrinsic pathway. Well, why can he still clot then? Yes, I can still do the other path. If you think about it, that's good design. If this one screws up, I can still clot and get to 10 over here. If those are messed up, I can still get to 10 over here. That's why you have a common pathway. So all the test proves he has problems in his intrinsic pathway, getting to 10, but as long as he has the extrinsic pathway, he can still get to 10 and keep clotting, right? Make sense? So that's the kind of question I would give you on a test. Say, if he doesn't have factor 7, which pathway is that in? If he doesn't have factor 10, what pathway is that in? Yes.
So in this situation, then he has a problem with either like 12, 11,
Sure.
9, one of those.
Something over here, yeah. So he has a hemophilia of one of these factors isn't on, or correct. Therefore, he can't get going this way.
But
But
if
if he
it,
has 7 or TF, he can get to 10.
so anything beyond common 10, like if that's broken, then
Then you're really messed up.
got
Don't they
it.
both have 7 though?
Yeah, wouldn't
They
7 be
do.
involved?
So extrinsic, yeah, so if you have a problem with the extrinsic pathway at 7, you could end up influencing an intrinsic as well, right?
Okay.
But the other factors are independent, basically. These 3 are not in that one. So you do have some crossover. But for our intents and purposes, I won't give you 7 because that one was involved. But I would give you 10. So just to show you again, I'm not making this up much. Let me show you the actual picture of this so you can cry and then hate me more. Okay? There it is. Here it is. All right. So if you have nothing better to do in your day, you could try to draw that all night long and come up with the whole ugly pathway. But in general, that's what I tried to put on the board. Here's all the funny numbers from intrinsic. Here's some letters and numbers for extrinsic. Everybody sort of ends up at 10. 10 hopefully turns on the common path, which uses fewer letters and numbers, but you get the clot. So if you want to go Wikipedia and memorize this, fine. If you just do what's on the board, I'm happy. Right? But each of these factors has a hemophilia associated with it. So let me show you that I'm not making this up much. Where's that magic chart I had? Yeah. So this is a chart that shows the different hemophilias and clotting disorders based upon which factor you're affecting. So here's a factor 5 deficiency. It affects some pathways and not others. Here's a factor 10. It happens to do this one, not this one. So you can go through and find different factors and see what will affect one pathway or the other pathway or both. So what you want to do for studying is think, if I don't have factor 7, which pathway is that in? If I don't have factor 10, which pathway is that in? That kind of stuff. I'm not going to ask you to memorize factor 7, blah, 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 Bernard-Subé. Yes?
Well, so 7 is in both.
7 actually is in both, but for the class, I'm just going to have 10 be the only one that you have to know for both.
And then 7 would be considered for you an intrinsic?
I was thinking the extrinsic one.
Okay.
Something right. Make sense? So all that free time you have, memorize a bunch of numbers.
So you pay me $1 if I can come up with a rhyme,
You
right?
can come up with a dirty rhyme for the clotting factors.
Alright.
Oh,
Quick dirty?
dirtier the better.
Cool.
Oh my goodness.
People remember dirty stuff, they don't remember clean stuff. Yes?
For them to, on the case study.
Yes.
What is it? Difference in terms of
Yeah, so number 2 was intrinsic tends to be within the vessels. Extrinsic tends to be outside the vessels. Is it okay? So I hate to hit this on you, but that is what PC expects. Just know the numbers as you go down. Something for you to do. Make sense? But all those would be clotting factor problems. Hemophilias are all these numbers somewhere. You okay those? As good as you can be? Yes. I bear bad news. Don't blame the messenger. Don't blame the players, 16. No, I have no coolness at all. I'm uncool. So what we're gonna do then for the rest of tonight, for a little bit, is start working on heart anatomy. Give me a second to bring up an animation.